Hi, I'm Gerardo from AWS.
Hi, I'm Ben from Firemind, and this is my architecture.
Ben, thank you for sharing this architecture with us. I'm curious to know, why did you build this system?
Yeah, sure. So I work for Firemind, and we're an all-in AWS partner that specializes in data, machine learning workloads for customers, and generative AI. Over the last 6 to 12 months, since Bedrock was available, we've been working with dozens of our customers on generative AI-based solutions. Lingoda were one of those customers. They're an online language learning school that specialize in beginners right through to enhanced learning of languages. And they wanted to create something a bit different and special for their customers around a role play chatbot. So rather than just learning a language, how can I use that in a real world scenario, whether that's buying a coffee or going to speak to a doctor and explaining your symptoms to them? They can practice that using this technology.
Perfect. So the students got access to this tool on top of the lessons to further practice their skills.
Correct, yes.
Awesome. So can you run me through how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So the user comes in, authenticates pretty standardly through Amazon Cognito, and then they will start their session through CloudFront and WAF. Pretty standard with everything we do with these, from a well-architected lens perspective. And then from there, the customer will come through and hit an API gateway.
Okay, when you say the customer, you mean a chatbot interaction?
The application, yeah.
Yeah, so this could be the student saying, I want to order a coffee.
Correct, yeah. So they will interact with a prompt, and they will say, I want to order a coffee.
Okay.
At which point, the system will go to S3, and inside of S3, we have a JSON file, and that has all of the information that Lingoda provided the solution with around all of the different scenarios.
Okay.
So it's kind of the data lake, if you like, or the information store where the scenarios are. So it will figure out which scenario it is, and it will pull back down into Lambda. And then we have a Lambda function that, based upon the question that's been asked and that scenario, will create a prompt, and then it passes it through to Bedrock, which starts that conversation. Okay.
So I presume that this JSON file with these scenarios is a way to also bound the context of all the conversations that can be had, so that this is not used as a, all generic chatbot, but something specific to the lessons, right?
Absolutely, yes. And we also use as part of Bedrock, we use we use the guardrails feature in there to make sure that there's no harmful language being used. They're not asking inappropriate questions, but also they're asking it in the right language. If they're learning English and they're a French student and they start speaking to the model in French, guardrails will pick that up as an exception, and it will flag it and say, hey, get back on track.
Brilliant.
Let's practice in English.
Brilliant, that makes sense. And so, so the answer gets generated in Bedrock. What happens next?
Sure, so we actually use DynamoDB to store the session data from that particular session where they asked that initial question. And then the next Lambda function, when they subsequently respond to the response it's had back from the LLM, it will build another prompt, but based on the session data that it's stored in Amazon Dynamo, forming the feeling of a true conversation. But what's actually happened under the hood is Lambda is building that prompt based upon the history, and it forms kind of a flow.
Okay, awesome. And so you're using basically you're storing all the history of that conversation to make sure that every generated answer is more accurate and keeps the conversation flowing.
Absolutely, yeah. It gives you that feeling of a true end-to-end interaction with a chatbot.
Fantastic. So what model did you choose, and how did you make that choice?
Yes, good shout. I mean, we love Bedrock at Firemind because it gives us a platform to experiment with lots of different models. We actually tested a few different models. Part of the process that we have with all of our customers is we'll look at Titan as well as the Anthropic models, and we test a set of, once the architecture is built, we'll test it with all the different models and look at the accuracy, present that back to the customer. And it's not just what we think is accurate. You need the line of business owner to tell us what is actual true accuracy. We landed on Claude 3 because it was given the best accuracy for this particular solution. However, during when we were building this proof of concept, Anthropic, because it's an ever-moving landscape, they released Claude 3.5.
Much better, isn't it?
Much better. I mean, the accuracy that we were seeing much improved. And one of the things we had to build into the solution with Claude 3 was some error handling, depending on how the customer presented the JSON file and how the input came through. Sometimes there there would be errors, and we'd have to use a Lambda to effectively handle those errors and reposition the prompt. With 3.5, it was much more intelligent, and it didn't need that. We actually have an offering with our customers around AI Ops, where we're going to do constant model evaluation for our customers. When Claude 4 comes out, Claude 5 comes out, other families of services of models, we'll be looking at these for our customers without them even knowing, and testing, and then presenting back to them to say, hey, this has come out, we've seen accuracy improvements again.
Yeah, and not only accuracy, it could be also speed improvements or price improvements as well.
Cost is a big factor as well. That was actually, it's a good point. That was one of the factors of using Claude, is because it was very cost effective, and especially with guardrails, being able to control that conversation, the user didn't go off down a rabbit hole, we can actually control the cost there as well.
Right. So I've seen that you've chosen to orchestrate everything yourself. Why not using Bedrock's native agents functionality?
Yeah, I knew you'd ask that question. So at the time we first started working with Lingoda, agents wasn't available to us in the region that we were working in. We're actually working with Lingoda now on another iteration of this, where we're going to replace a lot of the middleware architecture with agents, because it's much more efficient to use that.
Brilliant, brilliant. Ben, this is an amazing architecture. I love how you're using Gen AI technology in order to improve the experience for students. So now they have more ways of interacting and more ways of validating and improving their skills. Thank you very much for sharing this with us.
You're welcome.